Welcome, everybody, to another episode 3 of William Badke's Teaching Research Processes workshop for faculty. I'm delighted to introduce him back, but first, let's ask Dr. Tulin-Wilson to lead us in prayer. Dr. Tulin?
Okay. In the name of the Father, and the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Hail Mary, full of grace, Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou among women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for us sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. Father, Son, Holy Spirit.
Amen.
Amen.
I'm delighted to introduce Bill Badke. He is an Associate Librarian for Information Literacy and Associated Canadian Theological Schools at Trinity Western University in Langley, British Columbia, Canada. That makes this an international meeting. He has taught research processes to thousands of students for more than 35 years. His extensive publications show that he does research rather than just teaching it. Please join me as we welcome William Badke.
Yeah, a funny thing happened on the way to episode 3 of this particular series. I ended up in the hospital for 39 days. And so that was quite a shock to me. I wasn't feeling particularly sick or anything. It ended up being a complex of a number of different issues. Talking to my doctor last week, who is a Christian, he said, you are a walking miracle. So I guess I was sicker than I thought, but here I am, and the prognosis is labeled good, which sounds not as good as excellent, but it's good enough. So the first session that we talked about student research, we're really looking at the plight of students, struggling to be able to do their research effectively, struggling with the challenges that were facing them, expectations of professors, the kind of wall of misunderstanding that comes when you're trying to deal with databases and trying to put your thoughts together and trying to encounter various resources. And the point I was making was that without some really definite instruction that is consistent and is done over time, students are going to struggle, and they're going to continue to struggle, and we are going to continue to be disappointed with the kind of results that we get from students, which is kind of an unhappy experience all around. You know, we assign things, we expect to be disappointed, we are, students are disappointed because we're disappointed, and so on it goes. And so I think it's really important for all of us to think about this whole situation, see if there's a way to address it. And I argued that there is, that it doesn't have to disrupt your own teaching to any great degree, that it's possible to do this and to be able to train students to do research in a much better way. So that was the first session. Second session, we looked at disciplinary enculturation. How do we involve students in our disciplines in such a way that they understand how the discipline works, how it functions, and so that they can become participants in it rather than just simply watching it from a distance. Students are often alienated from the disciplines that we are introducing to them. They don't understand it. They don't understand how we think, how we do research, what we're expecting of them. And so I looked at some key questions that we need to ask and some key bits of instruction that we need to involve students in. By the way, you'll notice my voice is a little scratchy. That's because I had 39 days of tubes down my throat. So that's essentially what that is. I can survive it. Okay, today we want to take a look at design. How do we begin designing a plan to help students to develop research skills? And a way that doesn't involve tremendous disruption of our teaching. That's one thing I really want to avoid. Every time I suggest to faculty, well, you need to do this a whole different way, they start thinking, I've been doing it my way for a long time, and I really am not interested at all in having you tell me how to upend my entire program of teaching and do something new. I don't want to do that. What I want to do is suggest some things that are pretty simple and yet really quite intentional and can make a huge difference for student research. So none of this is going to really mess you up terribly. Okay, something I ask students very often as we're beginning looking at research is, why do your professors assign research projects to you? And once we get beyond the common answers of they're sadistic, they're cruel, they just like to see us suffer, etc. I tell them, get beyond that. That's probably not the case. There's something deeper. What does your professor want from you in assigning a research project? Can you tell me some of the things they might suggest? You're not sadistic, are you? That's not what you're doing. Well, one thing that they, yeah, Sebastian.
All right, I can throw something out. What we're looking for is a demonstration of the student's ability to engage in the discipline.
Okay, so a demonstration of ability, you grapple with something in the discipline, you show how you can kind of work the discipline in the ways that it's supposed to function in order to come up with a solution. And so that's really a demonstration of skill. Okay, that's one thing. Some students will suggest the professor wants us to go more deeply into some particular topic area within the course in order to understand it better, in order to grapple with it a little bit better, and report out on what they've learned, essentially. So that's very commonly a thing that students will suggest. And so on and so forth. I mean, there's a lot of things that they wonder about when they're given research projects, but they essentially understand a research project to be a deeper dive into some particular topic area and some kind of reporting out process that shows that they understand the subject matter and that they're able to explain it, deal with it, whatever, for the professor. And they commonly get out of that mediocre grades. How many of you have been bored by research papers, especially when you have a stack of them and you're seeing the same old ho-hum stuff day after day as you go through all these papers, and you kind of wish there was a way you could farm that out? Maybe you do farm that out to a research assistant, but a way that you didn't have to read this stuff, because it is so absolutely boring. It's banal. It's there's nothing exciting here. And then every once in a while you get an exciting paper. And what is that? Like, what constitutes an exciting paper? We all get them, all of a sudden, bingo, oh, here's something. And you perk up and you start looking at it much more deeply and start smiling. I had one student who suggested, she was a First Nations person, and she was looking at the Navajo practice in some Navajo churches of using peyote as the bread element in the Eucharist, in the Lord's Supper. And she asked me in advance, could I explore this? And I thought, this could get a little dicey, but I don't like to stand in people's ways. She was a bright student, and I thought, sure, explore it. She said, I just want to ask whether it's at all legitimate to do this, and which was a good enough research question for me. And so she investigated it and looked at the properties of peyote, etc., and the understanding of it in the minds of the Navajo people. And she came out with a really good paper that more or less justified it. And whether I agreed with her ultimately or not, I was very intrigued by this paper. And now, why would I be intrigued by this paper other than the fact that it's a little offbeat?
Well, I mean, I think when they're identifying a problem that they want to solve, obviously that helps. I would add another thing too, though. A couple of things. One is that for me, like, a lot of the students might have the same questions or even want to try to solve the same problem. So you're naturally going to get similar topics covered, and I'm fine with that, because, you know, I want to engage with the student where the student is. But for me, what really stands out is when the difference between a student who merely says, well, this is what this person says, and they stop there and they don't actually think for themselves, versus the student that turns in a paper where they see what other voices are saying on the topic, but then they actually go another step and say, putting together what people are saying, this is actually what I think about the topic.
Yeah.
And this is what I think about what these people have said on the topic.
Yeah.
So they've gone one more step, and they're actually adding their own ideas and thinking through the material, and not just stopping by repeating what somebody else has said, as though, well, if it's in a published book, it must be true, it's black and white. Whereas I want to try to help them see, look, people have their own voice, and you want to know what the different voices are out there, but now I want to hear your voice in the paper. What do you think about it?
Yeah, you know, once the student told me that she was going to explore whether this was legitimate or not, I fully expected her to come up with a conclusion. In fact, she wouldn't have done nearly as well in the paper. It ended up with having an A, but she wouldn't have done nearly as well if she had simply said, well, here are all the voices speaking into this. I really don't know what to think. That would have been disappointing to me, because I wanted her to think through and come up with a conclusion. Even if I didn't agree with it, much better to have the student engaging with material. And so those are some of the reasons that come up and some of the reasons that don't come up. Why do you assign research projects? What are you looking for with students? I think, Cynthia, you explained some of those things already. Any other ideas why you would do this? You do want to see what a student can do, right? You want to see how well they can deal with stuff. One thing that I want to try to move us into thinking about is that research projects can either be summative or they can be formative. A research project that is summative is the one that we are most familiar with. It is, do your project, turn it in, I will give you a grade. I will see what you can do, I will evaluate what you can do, I will grade what you can do, I will give you some comments so you can improve next time, but as far as you and I are concerned, once that paper is turned in and graded, it is done. There is a grade on your file, and you can ask if you could rewrite the paper, but chances are you can't, right? You've done it. Yeah, you've submitted your work. It's summative in that sense. That's the product, and you have graded it, it's done. There's another way of looking at projects, and that is a formative pattern. We're going to be talking a lot about formative in the coming sessions, but you have a wonderful example in your own experience of formative instruction. And this is particularly great for seminarians and Christian college people, and that's Jesus. Jesus was the ultimate formative teacher. If you take a look at 3 years of ministry in which Jesus instructed his disciples, scolded his disciples, re-instructed his disciples, corrected his disciples, told Peter, get behind me, which I believe actually to mean not, get out of my sight, but follow me as a disciple. You have much more to learn. I think that's the interpretation I follow of get behind me, Satan. In other words, get back there in the line of following me. Jesus instructed his disciples over a period of time in order to shape them into the apostles that they became. And I don't think they would have been nearly the people they were, even under the guidance of the Spirit, if they hadn't had those years of instruction. The essence of formative instruction is that nothing is finished until it has to be finished. Nothing is a done deal. In other words, you turn material in, it's not final, it's on the way, it's part of the process. Formative instruction generally takes the pathway of having students submit portions of their work, have it evaluated. If it doesn't meet certain criteria that you have, so you have rubrics and various things, if it doesn't meet those criteria, you send it back with instructions and say, try this again. Let's see if we can get it up to the kind of thing I'm looking for. And piece by piece, a research project is built. Now, why would we do that? It's a lot of extra work. It just doesn't seem to be, rigorous enough. The fact is that you can use research projects to teach students how to do research rather than simply to evaluate the fact that they have completed the research. I started on this process of looking at research projects as a formative instruction method quite a number of years ago. I think going back to about 2010. And back then I was looking at this whole thing and wondering what was going on. And I started to put out some publications, articles, book chapters. I did a plenary talk in New York at City University looking at this issue. And it wasn't really coming clear to me. And finally, about 2013, 2014, I got an email from Robert Farrell, who was a librarian at City University of New York at Lehman College. And he told me that he'd been reading some of my stuff, and he had been putting out some stuff as well that he felt was very much in sync with what I was doing. And so he sent me some of his stuff, and I realized, yes, we're thinking similarly. And then he told me he was working on a unique project, and this was quite fascinating. He had managed to corral some sociology professors and get them aside and say, hey guys, how is the student research working in your courses? And of course, the glum faces, these were undergraduate papers. They could easily have been graduate. How's it going? And of course, it wasn't going very well at all. And he said, what if we could improve student research? Would you be interested? And the answer was yes, as long as it doesn't take too much time and effort, but we're willing to look at it. And he said, I think the most important thing to start with is to find out what you think a good research paper should look like. What do you think is a good project? And so they said various things like, first one, of course, is students are able to cite their resources properly. That always comes up first. I don't know why, but always comes up first. Citations are not messed up. Second, things like coherent writing, critical thinking. And he said, no, wait a minute. Let's pull that back a bit and let's really take a look at that. What do you mean by critical thinking? Well, they're able to wrestle through the material and, come up with something useful. And he said, that's still too vague. It doesn't tell me, it doesn't tell the student what it is you're looking for. And so using some of my stuff, he suggested that maybe what we should be saying to students is, first of all, your concept of research, if you think it's merely compilation of existing material, is really not what I'm looking for. I'm not looking for you to compile a bunch of information to feed back to me in a paper. If that's all you're doing, then you're really not doing research. You're doing compilation. And I know a lot of the papers we see are merely compiling everything you need to know about so-and-so. Dear professor, I read up on this, and here's what I learned. And it just gets sort of blurted out on the pages. And you read it and you go, oh, how am I know all of this? Where's the critical thinking? And there isn't any. What if we suggested to students that a research project always has to be problem-based in some way or other? That doesn't mean it has to be a big problem. It can be a smaller problem. It can be a quest to search for something that we don't know about. It can be dealing with multiple points of view on something and coming up with a conclusion to it. But what if we told them that research is a quest and it's problem-based? Then we could say, well, students, if that's the case, then you need to make a statement of what the quest is. And I tell students, your statement of what the quest is needs to be one sentence and no more. And it needs to deal with one problem and no more. And so a quest like, is the use of peyote in the Eucharist a legitimate practice among the Navajo? That's a question that needs an answer. It's singular, it's clear, it shows what the goal is, and it demands what I call critical thinking. My definition of critical thinking is problem solving using evidence. Now, you might have a different definition, but that's what I see critical thinking to be, problem solving using evidence. We've seen in the political sphere lately, these multiple debates. And how do you resolve a debate? Republican and Democrat or parties in Canada have our debates as well. How do you solve a debate between two opposing forces? You gather evidence and you try to marshal the evidence to try to help you to understand which point of view is more likely to be correct. And you use that evidence to argue a case. That is critical thinking. And so now instead of saying use critical thinking and the student says, well, what's critical thinking? How does that get involved in me telling you about the atonement or about a certain teaching practice or whatever? Well, critical thinking seizes upon the problem that the student is addressing and seeks to grapple with that to a point at which some kind of conclusion can be made, making due note of the vital voices that are speaking into it. Another aspect of critical thinking that you expect, and I think Cynthia, you pointed this out, is that you got to hear the voices. You got to hear who's speaking into this and understand what they're saying and be able to respond to what they're saying. That's a vital part of research as well. And so if you're doing that, you've got some clear things that are goals. So a research project needs to be problem-based, and there needs to be some kind of a statement of what that problem is. So we're moving along in some goals. I want to share my screen for a minute. I'm going to move to if I can find it here. I don't know what it is, but every time I try to find anything on my screen here, so I'm just going to hide floating controls, go to design. So this is the third module of the platform that we're using. And I think Sebastian sent a link to that at the bottom of his email message. We're looking today at design. And I want to take a look at a concept that is so strikingly simple that I wonder why people write about it, and yet they get into great detail about it. And it's called backward design. And you notice the design sign doesn't go with the arrow forward, it goes with the arrow backward. And all this is when you design a project, start with the goal in mind. So often we say, well, I want to do this project and I want to start with, let's gather all these people together and we want to, get a working group and start thinking about how we're going to pull this all together. And my question is, hold it, wait a minute. What is the goal of your project? If you start with the goal, then you can work backwards from the goal into the process that's involved in meeting that goal. If you start with the process, you might never hit the goal. The goal might be something very elusive because you're not really thinking about it. So what my friend Robert Farrell did was he got these sociology profs together and he got them writing out 10 or 15 very clear, very concise elements of a good research project. And here are some things that I thought of. A clear problem-based stated goal. Can everybody see this? Enlistment of high-quality scholarly resources. So whatever you find in the bibliography, it's going to have to be high quality and scholarly. You don't want, a bunch of websites and, tweets and stuff like that. Found resources are focused on the research goal. This speaks to relevance. Every time I look at resources, I want two things. I want quality and I want relevance. You know, if a student's writing on the atonement and finds this really scholarly article on ecology of Nome, Alaska, forget it. You know, it might be as scholarly as you could imagine. It's useless in the bibliography because it's not relevant. So quality and relevance, very key elements. Once again, notice that these are quite measurable. I mean, you can determine if something's scholarly or not. You can determine if something's relevant or not if you have a goal in mind. Resources are interpreted well. There's nothing worse than students misunderstanding what they're reading and coming up with wild ideas about, you know, so-and-so said this when you know very well so-and-so did not. And I always warn students, you know, when you use a source, be really careful that you read enough of it to be able to understand it, because there's a possibility that your professor may well have read that source last week and remembers exactly what the author said. So interpreted well. The project reveals and addresses all relevant points of view. Now, this is tough for students, especially if they are used to using 3 or 4 resources. Students with tiny bibliographies are going to have very constricted views of the landscape of the argument. How broadly is this argued? Who are the main points of view? And that is why I suggest to students, especially at graduate level, no matter what the size of the project, start with a minimum of about 12 resources, books and articles. And then for every page of your document that you're going to submit, add at least 1 more resource. So a 50-page project should have 50 items in it. 20-page project, 20 items in the bibliography. And that seems to work fairly well as a rule of thumb. I mean, it's a little simplistic, but it seems to work very well. And you have to have that if you're going to be able to find the points of view. There's nothing worse in a project when there's a devastating argument against what you're going to propose and you never saw it. You never knew it. And that's something that you want students to avoid. The project is logically constructed around a clear outline. I suggest to students that as soon as they have a research goal, a research question, or a thesis statement, they need to create a preliminary outline right away. And students object. They say, I don't know enough about the topic. I always write my outline after I've written my paper, right? I go through the paper and I discern what the outline should be. And then I write the outline because the professor wants it at the beginning of the paper. And my statement is, no. Create a clear outline at the beginning. It needs to be only like 3, 4, or 5 points. And what your outline is intended to say is, these are the steps that I need to follow in order to move from my problem to my goal, from my problem to the solution. And what I say to students is that outline is precious. It's precious for a few things. First of all, it's a blueprint for where you are going. It says step by step, this is what I need to cover. And it tells you clearly, here is what I need to address by way of issues, challenges. So there may be an introduction, there may be 3 or 4 points of view, there may be some debate that needs to be followed. You need a conclusion. And so all of that has to be there. Now, that outline, I say to students, is preliminary. Your professor never needs to see your initial outline. So you can go crazy. You don't have to show it to your professor unless you want to. And in a formative project, you may very well want to, but if you're a little embarrassed about it, it doesn't seem very good, then you can revise it as you go along. The arguments are addressed with critical thinking and grace. So as you look at the arguments, you could say, made a good point here, you know, that's something, you know, the student pointed out that there's a thinking gap in this argument, that there's something very wrong, and also addresses the arguments with grace. I don't know if you have polemical students that think any point of view other than theirs is stupid. And they use words like stupid, ignorant, etc. in their research papers. I hope not. But that is sort of the opposite of grace. The opposite of grace is criticism that really makes no sense. Grace may well point out that an opposing point of view is wrong-headed, but it'll do it in such a way that you've been kind. And I think of G.C. Berkouwer, the Dutch theologian, who did a book on the theology of Karl Barth. And Barth got in touch with him afterwards and said, I read your analysis of my thought, don't always agree with you, but he said, you understood me. You understood me in such a way that I don't feel that you were unfair to me. And Berkouwer felt that that was the greatest compliment he had ever received. That, Barth, the guy that he had written about, said, you understood me and you treated me well. And that is important. Critical thinking, it's wonderful when a student points out a flaw in a pattern of thinking. I can remember a moment of triumph in my undergraduate days. I was taking a psychology course, and it was an abnormal psych course, so I was looking at schizophrenia in a research paper, and essentially looking at the causes of schizophrenia, which is a very complex disease, and there's a lot of controversy about, just how it comes into being. And I came across a study out of Brazil, and what it was a number of Brazilian heavy equipment operators, bulldozers and stuff like that, had serious critical accidents. And a few months after they recovered from their accidents, they developed schizophrenia. And the argument was that trauma, a serious accident, was a trigger for schizophrenia. That these people were, just waiting to have schizophrenia emerge, and the trigger was the accident. And I looked at this, and I looked at it, and I said to myself, there is something wrong here. And then it came to me. If you're experiencing symptoms of schizophrenia, you are liable to have distortions of perception. You may have hallucinations. You're operating heavy equipment in a very dangerous setting. What's to say that your loss of perception didn't cause the accident? That you were already having schizophrenia symptoms, and that led to you crashing your bulldozer. And so I raised this with the professor, and he was thrilled, because what I'd done was to poke a hole in an argument and say, it could be the schizophrenia caused the accident rather than the accident causing the schizophrenia. And when you see this kind of thing in a student, you're saying, aha, the student is using critical thinking. It's puzzling through, looking deeper than the problem, is looking at the evidence and saying, what's missing here? What's wrong here? What's right here? Am I convinced by this? Does it make sense? And, you as well, a further opposing kind of approach is, in my opinion, so-and-so. And, I don't want to be unkind, but for most students, hearing their opinion in a research paper is of limited, pretty well non-value. And then I threw in format is correct. I put it at the end, probably as a dig to you as professors, because I know you love format to be correct. I love format to be correct. And the reason I love it to be correct, other than it's really, really ugly to read through a paper with incorrect format and try to figure out, is this an article or a book, or what is this? Why is the date missing and all that? The main thing is that students need to understand the nature of the material they're dealing with. If it's a chapter in a book, it needs to look like a chapter in a book. If it's a journal article, it needs to have volume and issue number and date, because that's how you tell where it is, other than looking up the title in Google Scholar. And so what I did was I put together just a few key elements of what I consider to be a well-done research project. I haven't figured out how I'm going to teach students how to do this, but I've identified the goals. And so what Robert Farrell did with his students, with his faculty members, was to get them to write out up to 15 goals. And then he took them from each professor. He found which ones were in common, And so he emphasized those. He went back to them with the ones that weren't in common and said, which ones of these can we agree on? So that we can come up with one clear set of goals for a sociology paper. And they did that. And then he went on from there to say, now what I'd like to do is take these goals and write up a number of templates, maybe 5 of them, for how to get from the research project announcement to having students achieve these goals. What I'm going to do is set up 5 formative assignments, each of which addresses one or more of your goals. And you will have the students do that assignment, and you'll be looking for student achievement of those goals. You will have criteria that set up, like a rubric. A good assignment will do this. And if students meet the goals, they can move on to the next assignment. If they don't meet the goals, you don't fail them. What you do is you mark it all up, explain what's wrong and where things need to be. And you send it back to them, ask them to try again. And, might happen 2 or 3 times till the student has achieved that part of the goal. So it might be the first 2, or it might just be the first 1. And once the student has achieved that, once there's a really good stated goal, then you say, now you can move on to the next part. And so he did this with these professors and found that they were delighted with the results because they were able to teach students how to achieve their own goals. You notice I'm not telling you these are your goals. These are the ones I came up with, okay? Yours could be different. And they have to be very clear, but they can be different because I don't want to tell you this is what a good research paper is. I want you to tell me this is what a good research paper is. If you can determine in a clear way what you're looking for, and you may not have done this exercise before, what am I actually looking for? But if you can tell me and you can tell your students, then you're in the first path of design, which is start with the goal. What is it you want to achieve? We won't worry about the process yet. We're going to start with the goal. Now, you notice each one of these is clear and it's also measurable. If it's not measurable in such a way that you can look at it and say, I know how to determine whether this is a pass or a fail, whether this is a success or not. If you can't do that, then it's too vague. It's too unclear. And so logically constructed around a clear outline, you can take a look at that outline and say, does it make sense? Sometimes students will fail just in their outline. Did I tell you about a graduate student I had who was going to drop out of the program? I don't know if I did. Came to me 2 weeks before he's about to graduate. And he came to me, he said, I'm quitting. And I said, what, are you dropping a course? And he said, no, he said, I'm leaving. And I said, you're graduating 2 weeks. Well, what do you mean you're leaving? You can't be leaving the program. He said, my thesis is not working. I have worked on it, struggled with it. It's not succeeding. And my advisor can't help me. I don't know what I'm going to do. And I said, well, clearly if you came to me, you thought maybe I could help you. So give me your thesis and I'll have a look. Come back in about 3 hours. So I looked through his thesis. He had a very clear problem statement. That's the first thing I looked at. What was his thesis? What was his goal? Very clear. And then I started puzzling through. The second thing I looked at was his outline. I didn't even bother to look at his content. I looked at his outline. And he came back in about 3 hours and I said, the problem is the chapter 2 and chapter 3 are in the wrong order. I said, that's the problem. That's the only problem. You put chapter 3 where chapter 2 should be and chapter 2 where chapter 3 should be. You need to reverse the order and punch up the introduction and conclusion a bit, and you're good to go. He passed the thesis, he graduated, and he went on. And the reason I looked at the outline was that so often the thing that'll sink students is an unclear goal or a messy outline. And you can check that stuff. I mean, You are academics, you know what a good outline looks like and what a bad outline looks like. And so you can do that. You can analyze critical thinking. You can analyze format. So all of those are measurable, and they are things that you can actually concretely determine whether the student has succeeded. So some important teaching goals, principles. Teaching research processes to your students should not have to disrupt your teaching goals or prevent you from covering content. You shouldn't have to disrupt your entire course to do this. If you are committed to teaching students how to do research through their own assignments, as long as you are already issuing assignments, it means disrupting the assignments, but not disrupting your whole program. Second, you are the professor and thus the determiner of what your students should be learning. I, as a librarian, do not want to step in and say, you know, this is what your students should be able to do. You know what your students should be able to do. I mean, you've been longing for it, looking for it. Every once in a while you see it in a student assignment and you rejoice. So why not just simply think it through and you determine that. Teaching research processes means teaching to your goals for the kind of research projects you want to see. So your instruction becomes designing everything to meet the goals of having students learn how to do your kind of research project. Not somebody else's, your kind of research project. It's vitally important that you identify in detail what a good research project in your course should contain. It's got to be clear, it's got to be detailed. You will need to connect your goals to student research assignments to remove ambiguity and to use those assignments as tools to develop student abilities. So what you do is you take those student assignments and you break them down into various facets. We're going to look at this in a minute. And each one of them meets one or more of the goals. And so when it comes time for high quality scholarly resources, you're asking students to find resources, present the research problem and a preliminary bibliography. And you go through that bibliography and you see what's there. And you critique it and send it back to the student with the suggestion that some of those things are not exactly on target with what you're looking for, or they may not be the highest quality that you could have. Okay, now from this point on, you need a faceting plan. This is the next stage in design. You've got your goal and you've stated that clearly. Now you've got to design something that's going to meet the goals. And so a faceted plan broken down into about 5 pieces, could be 6 pieces, could be 4 pieces. Each is submitted separately by the student. And I suggest that you use a lot of email or posting to your courseware or something like that. Avoid, like the plague, paper submissions, because it is just too cumbersome with faceted assignments where you need speed. You know, you need to be able to get this stuff back to students pretty quickly. And so you instruct students through comments on each assignment. Think of Jesus. You know, the disciples would do something and Jesus would comment on it. I mean, how many times did that happen? You know, and Jesus would make a comment on something a disciple had said or done. And it was intended to correct the disciple so that the next time the disciple spoke about that issue, it would come across much more in line with what Jesus was looking for. So comments. This is simple mentoring. And so students improve on each assignment as they review the one before. So they review the comments. If they've kind of passed muster, when they move into the next one, they should be doing a little better. And it gives the opportunity for students to redo parts or all of the assignment. So formative assessment. The less useful alternative is the summative, turn it in, get your grade, which I really don't like. I know it's the mainstream of education these days, but honestly, it isn't what we need. Let me give you a little pep talk. What's your goal as an educator? It's to educate and inform your students, right? And I think for Christian educators, we're not just interested in the mind, we're interested in the whole person. We're interested in formation And you know, your background is very keen on formation. We want to form students, and then we say, you know, show me how well you can dance. To a student, you know, show me how well you can dance, and the student dances, and we say, not very good, fail, or not very good, I'll give you a low mark, go on your way. To what extent have we formed the student? To what extent have we even educated the student? We haven't. A student who gets a low grade on a research paper may or may not read the comments, but what they read in the comments is accusation. What they read is rejection. What they read is, you didn't pass muster, you didn't do very well. Now, I don't know about you, but for those of you who have children, if you constantly tell children that they're not doing very well, that they failed, that they don't succeed, you know what you end up with. You end up with an adult who's a mess, right? My dad never said anything good about anything I ever did or said. I hear that from people, and it's said with such grief and sadness, and I think, no, we can't do that in the classroom. I mean, we may not be able to pass everyone, but we're sure going to have to give it our level best to get them across the finish line. And that's why formative work is really key. What it means is, well, that didn't go so well, but don't lose hope yet. There is a path forward. And let me show you some things that went wrong here. See if you can take another look at it, give it another try, send it back to me, and let's see if we can improve the grade on this and move it up. That kind of thing, students, first of all, embrace it. They love it. When I tell a student, you can submit your assignment again, it's like, what, you mean I can submit it again? I thought I failed. No, you didn't fail. You can submit it again. What I want you to do is to improve on the work, and here's how. I'm telling you, this is magic. This is wonderful. And if your entire education moves away from strict control over everything your students do and say, and a lot of rapping knuckles, if you can move away from that, you're going to have just a wonderful experience in the classroom, and you're going to find that your students are being educated and formed. And if the model for what we do is Jesus, and I think it should be, that was his model. Now, sometimes he rebuked, but he did it in such a way that they were educated and they were helped. So, so you want as much as possible for them to get professional feedback from you and to be able to improve their work. I just want to show you the exercises and readings, and I'm going to just move my box out of here. Over here, for those of you who are looking for certification, or even for those of you who just want to try this out, there's some readings here from Teaching Research Processes and from Research Strategies. Compile your own list of goals for good research projects. And I explain some of the things that should be there. So think of a typical research project in a course you're teaching, and think of 5 or 6 very clear goals, no more than 10. You don't want to multiply your goals beyond about 10, because then it starts to get too diffused. And begin thinking of what sorts of assignments, faceted and formative, you would develop to reach each of your goals for a good research project. And so it's pretty simple. Compile some goals, backward design, find your goals, and start thinking about the sorts of assignments you want to address. I've got some readings here. You might want to have a look at the first one. It's an unpublished paper. I'm not sure why I never tried to publish that, because I looked at it and I thought, boy, that really embodies what I've been talking about today. So you can find it online there. This is the article that Robert Farrell and I ended up publishing with regard to our work, and it had to do with disciplinary thinking, so part 2 of module 2 of what we're doing, and then a practical and systematic approach to develop faceted assignments. And then kind of seminal article goes back to 1998. What is backward design? It's actually available online. It's a chapter in Understanding by Design, and pretty much summarizes what is meant by backward design. So there it is. All right, I'm going to stop sharing at this point because I very much want to see if there's any questions or comments as we go along. Does this make sense? Okay, raise the number one objection. This takes too long to do. Okay, faceted assignments. You mean I'm going to get not, 30 assignments, but like 150 assignments from my students? I regularly grade 150 assignments from my students, by the way, because I do faceted assignments and everything. But anyways, it takes too much time. What do you think? Okay, let me suggest some things. First of all, these are short assignments. You're looking at 2 or 3 pages at the most. They're not long. They take about 5-10 minutes each, so they're not long. And if you're using email or something, or your courseware program, you could fire them back to the student real fast. And I generally like to have a turnaround time of a day or 2. So it doesn't take that much more time. The other thing is it's less boring because you're not, struggling with things. Yes.
So, hi, Dr. Christina Olson here. Very much enjoying your comments. What about students for whom English is not their first language, working with international students? Just the writing of a 2 or 3 page paper could be daunting for some students. So any thoughts or tips on that?
Well, I've been teaching international students for 35 years, and some of them really struggle with English, particularly our Korean students, not because they're, it's a bad race or anything, nothing like that. It's because the Korean language and the English language are simply not in sync. Whatever it is, they just do not communicate. And so it's very difficult for our Korean students. I find that it's a struggle for them, but I learned something a long time ago with international students, and maybe I'll just pass it on quickly. We often think of international students by way of their deficits, right? They have trouble with English. It's a new country, new educational philosophy. They don't understand our databases. The way we assign research papers, they may not be familiar with, and on it goes, deficit, deficit, deficit. What I focus on are their strengths. And let me tell you about international students. They tend to be very, very bright, very intelligent, because to get over here, unless your parents have a ton of money, you had to jump through a lot of hoops to get here. They are highly inquisitive. They are very teachable. They're extremely adaptable, very much so. They are highly, highly motivated. They will work twice as hard as the average domestic student to get where they're going. And so, you know what I've done? I simply haven't worried about it. I will help an international student who's struggling. If they send me an email saying, I really don't understand how to do this, I will give them all the help they need. But I will assume that they have the gifts to be able to accomplish this. And I will simply not oh, poor you, I know I'm going to have to dumb this down. I just simply go ahead. And, it's extremely rare student who simply can't go ahead. And often it's for other reasons. I had one student, international student, who had a phobia about submitting any material to a professor, an utter phobia. Once I submit it, then I am under attack. And I worked with him. I told him, I will not criticize you. I will not put you down. I will help you. And if you need to do more on it, I will give you another chance. He wouldn't submit any work. And I had to fail him because I got no work from him. But I wouldn't worry about that. The other thing with faceted assignments that I want us to think about we have enough time for what is our priority, right? I mean, 24 hours in the day, we get certain things done because we have to. You know, you have to eat a certain number of meals a day. You have to, you know, whatever. We find the time, and it might mean we squeeze other things out of the way. But if teaching students how to do research is a priority, and I think it is because it's a life skill, students who can effectively grapple with multiple points of view, state problem goals for addressing issues, those are the kind of people we want out there in the workforce, in ministry, right? You know, if anyone from, you know, a common worker to a priest who has someone come to them with a burning problem, and they have to research it, and they have to figure out, you know, how can I help so-and-so with this thing? I've never heard of this thing. And to be able to find out what it is, what the points of view are and arguments. This is priority stuff. I mean, this is student skill par excellence. I put it on a level of content, process and content. If students can't work through your content, they are not being educated. And so there it is. Any other questions? I hope you're starting to get excited about the possibilities here, because this stuff really works. And I'm very thankful to Robert for twigging me on to his sociology professors and doing this. We've become good friends since then. We even did a conference together in Portland. And any other questions that you've got? Sebastian.
Well, I'm delighted that you're back with us, and that you've introduced us to this concept of formative engagement of the student. Is there still a role for summative engagement?
Ultimately, you have to grade the final project, right?
Sure.
And so what you do is you say to the students, we have worked on this and worked on this. Now's the time to fish or cut bait, or whatever expression you use. You're going to have to turn in a final project. But I will write comments on that one too, so that the next time you do a project, hopefully you can even learn from that. And generally the final projects I get back from students are pretty good. I mean, I have had students do some amazing things. I had a student, you know, I want to write on St. Patrick. And that was kind of like, everybody writes on St. Patrick, right? You know, I mean, it's a course in church history or mission. I want to do St. Patrick. And, you know, how much can you say about St. Patrick before you're, you know, repeating what everybody else said? But this student said, you know, it was interesting that Christian monks and various other people from Northern Europe went over to Ireland to observe Patrick in his methods of evangelism, and then took those methods back to Northern Europe. He said, I want to explore what happened to those methods when they went into Northern Europe. Did they translate into France, Germany, wherever? Or did they fall flat on their face because, you know, they weren't properly contextualized or whatever? And I thought, that is borderline brilliant. Maybe it is brilliant. You know, that's the kind of thing that people write whole monographs on, you know? And so when I see something like that as a final project, I say, you know, you have arrived. You know, you've made it. And whatever process I put you through, you know, gold standard at the end. That's terrific. I've had students do papers on Martin Luther's anti-Semitism, and you know, which is kind of a tricky project. But I had one student that, you know, I don't want to do that because it's pretty easy. You know, I can look it up. But he said, I've noticed Luther at the beginning was not really all that opposed to the Jews. You know, he wanted to evangelize them with his message. He wasn't really all that opposed to them, but he got crueler and crueler as time went on. And at the end, he was writing about put them in concentration camps, etc. You know, take their jobs away and separate them from their children, and, you know, all this horrible stuff. And the student, So I just want to ask one question. What happened? Which was a good enough goal. Like what happened? How come Luther turned from mild-mannered guy into a hater of Jews? And turned out it was theological. He believed that in the beginning that he was going to win over large populations of the Jewish people to the Christian faith. And it didn't work. He got rejected. And so increasingly he came to believe that the Jews were under the judgment of God. And therefore he would add to that judgment with his own judgment. Now, I think he was dead wrong. That's beside the point. But the student managed to figure it out. What was it? And he analyzed Luther's writings, and he came up with this, and it makes sense. And I've since seen that argument, so it makes sense. So students who do this kind of thing, it's rewarding for them. It's rewarding for you, and somehow you feel like you've educated somebody when you do this. And that's the goal. The goal of an educator is to educate and to form. And that's it. So there it is. There's my pitch. It was a little bit more of a soapbox today because I really want to push this. I believe in it. Have believed in it for a long time. I continue to believe in it. And I see it happen in students' lives. And I see students getting excited about research. And it's thrilling because I know they're going to take those skills into whatever workplace in life they follow. So I think we've run out of time.
We have. So we'll come back same time next week, next Monday, and we'll pick back up with us with session 4.
Yep, same Zoom link. We'll use the same Zoom link.
As they used to say on television, same bat time, same bat channel.
Right. Great.
Thank you, Bill.
Okay,
Angela is going to close us in prayer. Angela?
Thank you. In the name of the Father, Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. Almighty and eternal God, we praise you and give thanks for your great glory and the graces that you are bestowing upon us. Thank you for the clarity of this informative presentation. We pray for the continued health and well-being of the speaker and the school overall. We pray this through your beloved Son and the intercession of his Holy Mother. Hail Mary, full of grace, the Lord is with thee. Blessed art thou amongst women, and blessed is the fruit of thy womb, Jesus. Holy Mary, Mother of God, pray for our sinners, now and at the hour of our death. Amen. In the name of the Father, Son, the Holy Spirit. Amen. Thank you, Bill.
All right.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Bill.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you.